Okay, yes, so thank you for coming this morning. I'm delighted to be here. So as I was kindly introduced, my name is Daniela Nadj. I teach international criminal law and human rights at St. Mary's University, and I've written a book on wartime sexual violence in Yugoslavia and Rwanda, which I think is all interlinked, because this is Palestine. Gaza is also a gendered issue, given that 70% of the victims are women and children. The title of my talk is The Targeted Killing of Children During Wartime, a New Category of Crime for the Rome Statute. So on October 7, 2023, the military group Hamas launched an attack against the Israeli civilian population, not only civilians, though also IDF soldiers, at the Nova Music Festival in Israel. It is estimated that 1,200 civilians were killed and over 240 were kidnapped by Hamas. In response, Israel launched a military assault against the Gaza Strip, including its civilian infrastructure such as hospitals, schools, churches, and refugee camps, and all hospitals in Gaza have been bombed. This offensive lasted still lasting, right? We're 21 months in. It is estimated that around 400,000 Palestinians, not 67,000, these are Israeli figures, around 400,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed by Israel during its military campaign, including 50,000 children, many who are maimed and are being starved to death by Israel since March 2025, during a siege that has been imposed by Israel since then. Israel still argues that it has a right to self-defense, but according to the Fourth Geneva Convention, an occupying power does not have the right to defend itself. So that argument was always intellectually fraudulent and morally, of course, completely disastrous as well. And many academics argued that Israel had the right to defend itself, but they knew it wasn't true. So the argument that Israel had the right to defend itself against the attack by Hamas on the Nova Festival is not only morally wrong, but is also legally incorrect. Among the casualties, there are over 50,000 children, as I said. Many legal experts claim that the military assault on the civilian population of Gaza, of course, constitutes war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, given even televised statements by Israeli officials, which openly said, yeah, death to all the Arabs, and invoking, language of what did Netanyahu say? Amalek, death to the Arabs, they're animals, right? Starve Gaza, don't cut off all the electricity, cut off all the gas. Keir Starmer supported that too. So it is absolutely clear to all, and it's been clear to all of us who are serious international legal scholars, that this was a genocide from day one, right? Because it didn't start on October 7th anyway. Gaza has been a concentration camp since 2005. Many international legal scholars, such as former UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Professor Hazem Jamjoum, who's my friend, and I argue that this is the worst genocide of all time, due to it's the worst Holocaust. I call it a Holocaust. And I'm half German, I know the heaviness of that term. Half German, half Yugoslav. So that this is the worst genocide of all time due to the intensity of the bombing, the complete flattening of Gaza to the ground, and the number of children killed, in addition to the 3 months total siege on Gaza, and man-made political hunger crisis, where half the population of Gaza is at acute risk of starvation and malnutrition, when Israel does not even allow baby formula to get into Gaza. It is now proven that children and civilians have been deliberately targeted by Israel when going to collect food, as have adult women and men, because it's not just about children, right? It's also civilian men and women who have a right to exist. They're not fighters. And Gaza is, of course, also a gender genocide, as I said, as 70% of the victims are women and children. Not to mention that all hospitals in Gaza have been bombed by Israel in clear breaches of the Geneva Conventions, because hospitals are civilian institutions, they're not military targets, they should never be targeted under the laws of war. So over the last few days, the oldest Catholic church in Gaza was also bombed, in another clear breach of the Geneva Conventions, because churches, of course, are religious institutions, mosques are always protected institutions. So the number of Palestinian children killed by Israel constitutes the highest death toll of children in I think in all armed conflicts around the world, to be honest. According to Save the Children, more than 10 children per day on average have lost one or both legs in Gaza during the conflict, which is unprecedented in the history of genocide. I'm sorry to have to say this, but not even Hitler did this. So according to UNICEF, more than 4,000 children have lost a limb in Gaza. Gaza is home to the largest cohort of child amputees in modern history. It is safe to say, as Médecins Sans Frontières described it, that Gaza is the most dangerous place on the planet to be a child. So I'm arguing in my paper that Israel has engaged in the deliberate targeting of children throughout its military campaign in Gaza. Many more thousands are missing beneath the rubble, caused by the 25,000 tons of explosives that have been dropped on Gaza since October 7, equivalent to 2 nuclear bombs, more than the force of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The IPC has reported that the entire population of 2.2 million people is facing acute food insecurity, and this is the highest share of people facing high levels of acute food insecurity that the IPC initiative has ever classified for any given area or country. This is worse than the Congo or Sudan. 1 in 4 households are facing catastrophic conditions, including starvation. All under 5s in Gaza, this is 335,000 children, are now at high risk of severe malnutrition and preventable death. So the Holocaust of Gaza is not only a failure of Israel to abide by any standards or rules of international humanitarian law and the Geneva Conventions in Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territory since 1948, it is also a collective failure of the world and what I would call a stain on humanity, because we're all collectively responsible for Gaza, right? Nobody's completely innocent in this. It is also the failure of governments, university and academics, corporations, banks, insurance companies, and Western TV stations, like the BBC, as all these institutions were in one way or another complicit in the genocide in Gaza, with governments such as the United Kingdom, the United States, of course, at the forefront, and Israel being active participants in the genocide, as the journalist Matthew Kennard says it. Due to the supply of arms and intelligence to Israel, 80% comes from the United States. Second highest military supplier is Germany, to my shame. And then it is, of course, Britain provides the intelligence, the drones, as usual, and then Israel executes, right? So, but it is also the direct participation, of states such as Germany, which is the second largest arms supplier to Israel, France, of course, right? Italy, Spain, Denmark, Netherlands, Norway, which continue to supply arms and spare parts needed for weapon supplies to Israel. And then you have prime ministers like in Greece, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, who's a great friend of Netanyahu. There you go. Moreover, leading international organizations such as the United Nations, the European Union, and the humanitarian sector, which were meant to ensure a fairer, because when I grew up, I thought the UN was the beacon, right, of humanity. The idea was that they would prevent wars, right? We would have peace. So these institutions were meant to ensure a fairer and more peaceful world after the horrors of World War II. They have catastrophically failed the people of Gaza and Palestine. And those responsible will need to take full responsibility and accountability for it, including having to go to prison for their crimes. But Gaza is also the story of another conflict, which unfortunately the large majority of the Western audience, and when I said it on Facebook a few months ago, I received so many horrified reactions, because I spoke the truth. It's also a story of another conflict, which the Western media has failed to completely accurately portray. It is also the story of Russia and Ukraine. Because Vladimir Putin has been fighting Zionism and fascism in Ukraine since 2014. When NATO wanted to make incursions into, it didn't want to have NATO troops on his border, backed by the Americans, of course not. This has been entirely misrepresented by the Western media, and he might have committed war crimes, yes, but he certainly is not bombing hospitals and children. In fact, Russia had to act preemptively against Ukraine as NATO threatened to station troops on the Russian border in a clear affront to Russian sovereignty. It should be clear by now that Zelensky himself is a Zionist who had ambitions to turn Ukraine into a greater Israel, which Russia has now successfully prevented after a 4-year intensive military campaign, during which millions of Ukrainian and Russian soldiers have been killed. For what, at the end of the day, right? Moreover, the contested Donbas region, which has now been taken over by Russia, and is entirely 90% Russian-speaking. They had a referendum a few years back, and they overwhelmingly voted to be part of Russia, because they're Russian anyway. As Putin always says, Ukrainians and Russians are the same. 1 million Syrian refugees in 2015 alone under Chancellor Angela Merkel. Great leader. Probably she also knew that it was wrong. So Gaza is also a tale of the many hidden stories of the world, which were buried deep underneath government files, as the truth was so dark and horrendous and all tied to money, power, sex, unfortunately, as well, as we see with the Epstein tapes, currently engulfing Trump's presidency and incredible amounts of racism and Islamophobia thrown in. Even I, who is very aware of racism, even I fail to accurately estimate the levels of Islamophobia around the world, and not just in the West. There has also been a catastrophic failure of the Arab world to help their Muslim brothers and sisters in Palestine, for which there will need to be accountability, and I predict eventual decolonization of the Arab world, once and for all, free from the current complicit dictatorships such as Egypt or Saudi Arabia or Jordan. So as I see it, Gaza and Palestine is the biggest political, legal, social, and moral revolution the world has ever seen. Because it is the first time in modern history that a Western audience has realized that the problem is not Iran, Iraq, or Yemen, but the problem is the imperialist United States and the major Western powers. So this is a big shift now. And this shift in public perception is all thanks to the dedicated efforts of thousands upon thousands, if not millions, of protesters who marched for Palestine around the world, not just after October 7, but also before, for decades. Often I've been doing this for 20 years. I didn't even tell my friends sometimes, and some were laughing at me. So we've been marching for decades for Palestine, you know? But they didn't take us serious because, you know, it was not, until October 7, it was not, you know, there was no danger really. It was kind of cute to be pro-Palestinian. But, you know, and yeah, we have a big problem in universities, but I can address this later, because it's a lot of academics who we should be at the forefront of this, because we're intellectuals. They failed for money, mainly for monetary reasons and a bit of racism too. But it is also thanks to the brave freelance Palestinian journalists who have been able to live stream this genocide every day, despite being killed in record numbers themselves. In the end, no Western media presence was ever actually needed in Gaza to document the crimes. That was also a bit of a patronizing argument. You need the Western media to, and no, you don't. This is all live streamed on the internet. And despite all this, we're still only scratching the surface of the horrors that have been committed in Gaza since 2005. We don't know how many Palestinians have been killed since then, because Gaza has been the largest active crime scene since 2005, as Professor Norman Finkelstein says. There's no presumption of innocence here anymore. Any IDF soldier is presumed guilty until proven innocent, because the likelihood that they have committed serious war crimes is enormously high. And they're still roaming around Gaza. So Gaza today is the world's largest active crime scene and has been so since 2005. And thanks to Professor Norman Finkelstein and Chomsky and also the late Professor Edward Said, I think these are the top 3 intellectuals in the world today, because they, not only did they change history, they also changed the way we look at history. And I think the way, without them we couldn't have done this, because you need the intellectuals to do this, to get this over the line. As Chomsky said, to Finkelstein said, we don't need to speak truth. We don't need to speak truth to power. Power already knows the truth. What we need to do is we need to convince the 80% of the Western audience, which is either not aware of it or does not want to be aware of it, of the truth. Power already knows the truth. And of course, everybody in Israel knew what was going on in Gaza and in the West Bank forever. And they were laughing about it. It's not just a Netanyahu problem. So I finally want to conclude with the words of the Palestinian professor of human rights law based in the United States, at Rutgers, Professor Noura Erakat, who had this to say, and I think it's one of the best things I've heard about Gaza this whole horrific 21 months. Let's free Palestine so that we can free ourselves from ourselves. Thank you.
Sharing. It's incredibly difficult to process all of that. I just want to acknowledge how emotionally devastating some of the information that Daniela has just shared with us is. I'm going to invite Hazem, if you'd like to please come and share now for, I think 8 minutes is the time that we spoke to you about. I believe you're going to talk a bit about the history of Israel-Palestine and the complicity as well in local forces in what's currently going on.
Thanks, guys. I'm going to do this sitting down if you don't mind. Thank you all for showing up and for hosting us I'm going to speak a little bit about history just to kind of fill in, because even though we always say that this didn't start on October 7th, I find that people don't then go on to talk about what happened before October 7th. I think the first thing to really note is that Zionism is a product of anti-Semitism. It actually begins, the first idea of moving Jews to Palestine comes from evangelical Christians in the late 18th century, early 19th century. When we get the shift from looking at Jewish people as these kind of like less human Shylocks into, if you read Ivanhoe and look at the character of Rebecca, Jews are people who are human and have virtue, but there's no room for them in Europe, right? They can be virtuous just somewhere else. And so you get this about a century of European writing and thinking that is not hateful of Jews on its face, but says that Jews are full human beings. There's no room in this town for the both of us. They need to go somewhere else. And of course, not many Jewish people ascribe to this. But then as anti-Semitism rears its ugly head in Europe in the 1880s and 90s, you begin to have middle-class and upper-class Jewish intellectuals in Western Europe start to say that the solution to anti-Semitism can be found in an understanding of imperialism and nationalism. That if we rethink of Judaism, rethink it from being a religion to being a national identity, and if we follow the imperial cue that since we are white Europeans, that we have the right to go anywhere else where darker people live, we can go and take over there, and that's fine, right? And so you get the birth of Jewish Zionism. The idea that the response and the solution to anti-Semitism is to create an exclusively Jewish state somewhere outside of Europe. And the reason it needs to be outside of Europe is that we know that Britain isn't going to give us Yorkshire. We know that Germany isn't going to give us Bavaria. And yet 86% of the globe is controlled by imperial European powers. And so we can lobby these empires to see who will carve out a little corner for us somewhere in their empire and hand us over a state. And so since the late 1890s, Zionist strategy was to lobby imperial powers and say, give us one of your pieces of land in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, that we can go and create an exclusive Jewish state. And so Zionism, from its very inception, is an imperial ideology. It's also a white supremacist ideology. Right? It's an ideology that's very exclusively a white movement, a European and North American movement, and it's very explicitly a movement that says we'll take any piece of land where there's dark people, and we'll just go and settle that land and take their resources and treat them like they're part of the natural topography, and we'll create our state there. Right? And from the very beginning, the metaphor that the leadership of the Zionist movement gives is, and this is something that the first Prime Minister of Israel says, he says that the dream state that we have is one where the prostitute is Jewish, the cop who arrests her is Jewish, the prison warden, the judge who sentences her is Jewish, and the prison warden is Jewish, right? From the very beginning, it's about policing, courtrooms, prisons, and a carceral regime. When the state of Israel is formed, the only reason it's able to be formed, so from the very beginning, the idea is to have a piece of territory that is exclusively Jewish, right? And Jewish starts to take on this other meaning. It becomes a legal category for the state of Israel, right? Jewishness has nothing to do with your religion in Israel. It has everything to do with what you're registered as under the laws of the state. So let me give you an example to make clear what I mean. In the 1990s, a lot of people in the Soviet Union discovered that if they could find a rabbi to certify them as Jewish, then the Jewish agency would fly them over to Palestine and register them as Israeli citizens. So tens of thousands of non-Jewish Soviet subjects or former Soviet subjects do this. They forge papers that say that they're Jewish. They get the Jewish agency to fly them over and to work on their paperwork. And now they have Russian Orthodox churches. They're church-going Christians. But legally, on their ID cards, and as far as the state is concerned, they are Jewish, legally, right? So when we say Jewish after 1948, in the context of Palestine and Israeli law, we're not talking about religion. We're talking about a legal category that's similar to the legal category white in apartheid South Africa. Exactly analogous, right? From the 40s, and treats the Gaza Strip again as this kind of highly securitized military occupation, brutalizes the population that never for a single day stopped resisting this occupation. And then, after what was the so-called peace accords of the Oslo peace process, in which the Palestine Liberation Organization surrendered and signed up to become the prison warden over the West Bank and Gaza Strip, the first line of defense for the Israeli state, right? Yesterday, there were protests that went out in most cities in the West Bank. Who went out and shot live ammunition at the protesters? It wasn't the Israeli army. It was the Palestinian Authority police, and that's been the case since the 90s. Right? The Palestinian Authority, much like the tribal councils in indigenous communities in the United States, the band councils for indigenous communities in Canada, the capos in the concentration camps, the Quislings in Norway, the Vichys in France. This is an old, tried, tested, and true, the Bantustan administrations in South Africa, an old, tried, tested, and true settler colonial strategy of find some of the natives that we can pay, blackmail, whatever it is, and we give power to. We empower, we arm, we train, we give them the ability to lord it over their compatriots, and make them the first line of defense. This is occupation on the cheap, settler colonialism on the cheap. Right? Let the darkies kill one another before our boys have to face the line of fire. Right? Since 1997, Gaza has been completely sealed off. The Red Line Doctrine that Israel actually announced, right? This is actually public, a matter of public record, was that the amount of food allowed into Gaza was what is the minimum amount of calories required to sustain a human life for a day, multiply that by the number of people that live in Gaza, and that's how many calories we allow into Gaza since 1997. Beginning in 1999, on an average of every 2 years, the Israelis went in and did what they called, again, matter of public record. This was reported in their newspapers and in a handful of newspapers outside of it. And by the way, Israeli media is much more honest than any of the Western media. Something they called the mowing the lawn. To come in every 2 years, with a major bombing campaign to cull the population in front of the world, right? And anything can be used as a pretext. The Israelis are masters of using anything as a pretext. And so, what would you do in this situation? A concentration camp. You've been living in a concentration camp for decades, and now food is being restricted. They come in and mow them on every 2 years. They're gonna come kill you. Every Palestinian is basically a ticking clock until they die because of Israel. Right? We are all martyrs in the making. And so it's a question of what do you do with that? Now, this is not just about Palestine. This is about you and your society. Israel is creating a situation where it has created the precedents and enabled the creation of precedents to completely erode the world you think you live in. Right? As was said, after World War II, there was this kind of institutional setup made that never again. We're going to have a United Nations, we're going to have international courts, we're going to have rule of law, and there is some morality and some principles that are going to govern the world that we live in, so that if we have a rogue state that's going to just fly off the handle and start killing people or causing havoc, then the international community is something meaningfully existing that's going to come in and put a stop to that and hold some people accountable. In the case of Israel, it's been flipped. Because this notion of anti-Semitism, this equation of Israel and Jewishness, right? This invention that Israel somehow equals Jewishness, therefore, any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. Any action to hold Israel accountable is anti-Jewish. Because that was established very early on in the 40s and 50s and 60s. It made it so that Israel had complete impunity. Since the 90s, this has been completely weaponized against the people of the world. How has it been weaponized? Israel will violate international law. Because it has impunity, it can get away with that. And so people think maybe international law is the Geneva Conventions. Most of international law is actually just precedent. It's what's called customary international law. If a state does something and the international community lets it get away with it, that becomes a precedent. Because then if I go and do it, and somebody comes and says, hey, you can't do that, I'll say, no, but he did it. And you let him go get away with it.
I caught this about 2011, 2012, watching a BBC Hard Talk interview with the Polish foreign minister. Poland has one of the most draconian refugee determination systems in the world. It's like arrest them now and deal with it later. And
0.05%. This is a perennial fight between Germany and Poland, which nobody here talks about.
Sure.
Because everybody in the EU has to take an equal number of refugees, and Germany's taking everyone. Why is it not there?
well, and so this is where it gets interesting, is that the interviewer, Tim Sebastian at the time, says, how come you have this terrible refugee determination system? And the foreign minister says, we actually have the same refugee determination system as Israel. And so Tim Sebastian's response was, okay, next question. Right? If Israel can do it, then it's okay. We can't criticize Israel. And if Israel does it and gets away with it, which it always does, then it makes it so that all the other states can do it and say, well, we just did what Israel did. Are you calling me anti-Semitic? Right? And so now the world we live in right now is a world where a state can go to war and specifically and openly and explicitly target the infrastructure that sustains human life. Hospitals, food sources, water sanitation infrastructure, human life, schools, churches, mosques, UN agencies, food distribution sites, and get away with it. Which means that when India and Kashmir were having a very scary issue a few months ago, we had the entire kind of Indian fascisto commentariat saying we need to Israel now, right? And we all knew at the time that if India went into Kashmir and started targeting hospitals and schools and maternity wards and water desalination plants, that they were going to get away with it because they were going to say, yeah, but Israel is doing it right now, so it must be okay, right? The other thing that we're having is that because Israel can do no wrong is the official line and the official policy, it means that anybody who says that Israel is doing wrong is committing something criminal. And here is where it's affecting you very, very directly. And either we use it or we lose it in terms of what's left of our rights to say no and to have dissent. In the last two weeks, the British state and the British police have arrested over 100 people, and from one thing I heard a cop say, he just needs 2 out of 10 for suspicion of support for a prescribed group, PAL action. If you have a flag, it's okay, but if you have a flag and a t-shirt that shows support for Palestine, that's 2 out of 10, they can arrest you on suspicion of supporting a prescribed group. If you have a t-shirt and you say something that says end genocide, right? That's something as basic as stop the genocide. Then a policeman now has the authority to come and arrest you on suspicion of support for a prescribed group. This isn't just about Palestine. Also, we saw it with the climate change movement. Kill the bill, we didn't kill the bill. Police powers have been gradually and now acceleratedly expanding, and our rights to dissent, to protest.
A lot of black people are detained and are in prison and, undocumented.
100%. And indigenous people in Turtle Island and all racialized groups have not just known it, but have been saying it. But we don't need to kind of
Stop and search.
100%. But now it's a point where we have 86-year-olds, white people, right, with a t-shirt saying something like, stop genocide, coming in and being charged with suspicion of support for a terrorist organization.
It's disgusting.
And so this is not just about Palestine. This is about our rights to have opinions. This is about our right to have a say in our society. This is not just about Palestine, because tomorrow if you want to say something about any issue, right? Anything to do with your workplace, anything to do with your life, your neighborhood, your access to clean water, your access to heating, your ability to feed your children. If you want to stand up for yourselves on anything, Israel once again is coming in as something that becomes the precedent that says, no, you don't get to do that, that's a breach of the law. We have a situation now where a party that's called the Labour Party, the party that's supposed to be representing workers, went ahead and purged its own Jewish members in the name of purging anti-Semitism. to get rid of a challenger, Jeremy Corbyn, who was saying, no, we need to have a principled foreign policy and we have to have a principled domestic policy. This isn't about worship for Jeremy Corbyn. This is about the Orwellianism, the absurdity of this fascist right wing of this party coming in and purging the party of so-called anti-Semitism, which was exclusively critique of Israel. Right? There was no evidence of anyone being actually anti-Semitic. There's a lot of evidence that the evidence that they trumped up to show that there was some kind of actual anti-Semitism was blatantly untruthful, was blatant lies. To purge the party of anti-Zionists, most of whom or many of whom were Jewish. We have Christian white folk coming in, purging a Labour Party of Jewish members in the name of getting rid of or challenging anti-Semitism. It's unbelievable. And now, I'm finishing, it's the last point. And now, when the British fascists win some mayoral and municipal elections, the Labour Party, instead of coming in and saying, here's the position from Labour, no, we are not going to allow for fascism to take over this country, they go and they switch their policies over to fascist policies. Because, you know, fascist voters are going to be like, oh, the Labour Party is turning fascist, now I'll vote for them. As if, right? But it's very clear, this is about a ruling class establishment that isn't here for us. And if we don't take back this society, it's going to eat us up. And it's not that we are approaching fascism. It's not that we are approaching genocide. It's here. And if we don't do something about it, it will further entrench itself, and we will start slapping our faces for not doing something sooner.
Slightly switch up how we're going to structure these sessions. So initially we did want to do deliberations, but I want to give Leigh enough time to speak and for you guys to ask him all of our speakers questions. We will engage in proper deliberations after the break so that we can do go-arounds. But I want to make sure we've got enough time for the Q&A and for you to speak. So Leigh, thank you so much for offering your testimony here on the experiences, the things you've seen in the West Bank and Gaza, serving as an emergency paramedic. So please.
So I have prepared a talk for you for today, which comes from my own experience, but in support of my colleagues here. The USA have vetoed the UN 27 times to stop Palestine being included in the United Nations, and that's done with a Zionist plan, a future Zionist plan. And also I attended a speech and lecture by a doctor when I was last in Nablus City. And he said, if the world tolerates this genocide, it'll tolerate the next, which is exactly what you say. It's setting a precedent. So it's up to us, the people of humanity, the people who have humanity in their hearts, to stop the world tolerating genocide and being, as Emma Camino, who is one of the Filth Nadin's mothers, said, being quickly marched into fascism. So I'm here to talk to you about genocide. But I'm going to talk to you about slow genocide, insipid genocide, preconceived genocide. Not that I believe that genocide can actually be done quickly and accidentally, but what's happened in Israel has been pre-planned for years. So when I was first in Gaza in 2005, 2006, which was in the last Nakba, which was a genocide. You know, Nakba is the word for war, isn't it? And it was just a blatant genocide. So it was the first place I heard somebody actually scream, "Where is the world?" And I had no response. It was the first place that I'd seen child killing used as a weapon of terror and a weapon of manipulation. And by that I mean the shooting of under 10-year-olds by high-powered weapons with extremely accurate sights, but to shoot these children in ways that they die slowly. One, so that people hear them, compassionate people hear them, try and go out to help and get shot. Two, it causes terror. And believe me, it does cause terror. Before I was out there, I worked quite extensively. I'd been to Iraq as an emergency nurse. I worked quite extensively in emergency trauma. But I wasn't ready. If you can ever be ready, if you have humanity, if you can ever be ready for the sound of children dying slowly. Sorry, my mouth always goes dry when I'm speaking. So there was an offensive in There was an offensive in Sikkim, which is where I was Sikkim, in Gaza, in 2006, which is called the Summer Rains. And it was summer, it was nice and warm, and Sikkim is a beautiful Mediterranean beach. But what they made it rain was bombs and bullets. And as I said, they were killing the children. The other reason, or the final reason I'll address for the killing of children, is to suppress people. Because the Israeli psychologists and the German psychologists have found if you kill the children first, the people lose the will to fight. Because there's no reason for them to fight. There's no children. So this is going to scar humanity, what's happening in Israel at the moment, and especially what's happening in Gaza. It's going to scar humanity in a way which I think is worse than we were scarred by what Hitler did. And not just Hitler, it was his funders, basically. But I won't go into that. It's going to scar it worse because we're watching. Humanity, we are watching and we are tolerating it. And every day we do nothing about it, we know we've done nothing. And that's what hurts me, that's what burns in me. Is the fact that every day that I get up and I eat food, and I'm not under oppression yet, and I'm not in the world's biggest concentration camp yet, that burns in me, because I've seen what they've done for Gaza. When I first went to Gaza, there was beautiful cities, there were parks, there were universities. You could walk in. I was back there trying to get there in 2025, in February. I was with an anaesthetist, 2 other paramedic nurses. We got within 10 kilometres and they started shooting at us. They started shooting at us because we were in an ambulance. At the time, they were shooting journalists, they were shooting bakers, and they were shooting medics. So there's no food, there's no help, and nobody knows about it. This is how insipid this genocide is, how preconceived this genocide is. They just shut down 92% of the West Bank. We're all looking at Gaza, and we need to look at Gaza. But they've shut down 92% of the West Bank. When I was in Gaza in 2005, 80% of it was shut off. You could still go in and out. Now nothing goes in and out of Gaza. Not even rats, if they haven't got the right paperwork. Wherever I went when I was 20 kilometres, 10 kilometres outside, I was being screamed at to take my uniform off, take my tablet off, because they were going to shoot me as a medic. They were shooting medics. So the West Bank, there's 3.24 million people in the West Bank, half of them are children, half of those children are under 10. They're going to do the same to them as they do in Gaza. I don't think I need to say anything else about that. I don't think I can. In the West Bank, in the last 2 years, half of all children that have been killed by the IOF or the IAF, as I call them, the Israeli attack force, because they are not defending anything. They have killed as many children in the last 2 years as they have in all of history. There is a reason for this, which I discussed earlier. The child killing is raised by 200%. When I was in the city of Tulkarm, I got called, I was with an emergency team, and I got called to the shooting of a 10-year-old boy. We'd already picked up some casualties, so there were casualties that were already bleeding in the back of our ambulances, and I'm an endurance runner, so I ran ahead. I've been told every time I'm in Palestine or when I'm in Gaza, if I hear bees, it's not bees, I'm in sniper fire. So I'm running, and I can hear bees. And the only thing I can do is hide under a metal bin. 3 hours I was kept under a metal bin whilst I heard a 10-year-old boy die of gut wounds. And it took 3 hours for him to die. And I don't have words for the terror that that caused to me, but it's not about me, but the people that were around. London's supposed to be the seat of UK democracy. On July the 5th, with 25 other very, very brave people, I don't know if I was as brave as them, because I held a flower, not a sign. I held a white rose for truth, and I spoke the truth to Parliament, and they arrested me as a terrorist. So we're at a point now where not only speaking your mind and giving your opinion is terrorism, the truth is now terrorism. The Zionist news, or British newspapers and British news media, love to prey on the blitz spirit of London. That wonderful, cohesive British patriotism that brought everybody together in the blitz spirit. The blitz spirit came about because London was bombed by a genocidal fascist regime. So London has got more in common with Gaza than it has with Israel. But what's London doing now and what's Britain doing now? We are helping the fascist genocidal regime.
No, actively participate, not helping.
Actively participating, yeah, absolutely, and profiting, yeah, absolutely, yeah, I'm with you, and the military. When I was outside Gaza, the British SAS were on ground in Gaza, pinpointing places for the F-35 to bomb. And the British SAS aren't part of the military, they're actually the Prime Ministerial Guard. Yeah, absolutely. And they pinpointed the UN building, because it was full of journalists. They pinpointed it and bombed it with F-35s that were made in this country. And those F-35s are terrorism. So when I was in Tulkarem, when I was in Nablus City in the West Bank, beautiful, beautiful places, absolutely beautiful places, full of the most generous, hospitable children of Islam, the most beautiful people. They really are what they call the heart of Islam, because they are so compassionate, they're so welcoming, they're so loving. The F-35s would go down and they'd drop bombs on Gaza, and then they'd turn around and they'd come in low and they'd low fly over the cities just to say we can hit you at any time. And having seen what they do, having seen the sky on fire, where there's a wind which is being caused by the explosions, literally a wind, it feels like a natural phenomenon, but it's the oxygen is being sucked out of the air to feed the fire which is caused by the F-35s. You realise what British and American and Israeli terrorism truly is. Terrorism isn't painting a plane, terrorism is what the plane does. Terrorism is not holding a white rose for truth. Terrorism is the truth that's being spoken about. I'd rather be at home with my dogs. I'd rather be with my lovely wife. I'd rather be gardening. No offence, you're all very lovely. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. If they were shooting dogs, Britain would be out of arms. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. I'm with you all the way. So promising hungry people food and shooting them is absolutely no different. In fact, it's the same mentality as offering people who haven't had a wash a shower and gassing them. I've gone into some trouble for saying that, but I'm going to say it again, because it's my truth. It is the same mentality. So the wonderful Sue Parfitt, the 83-year-old vicar, retired vicar, who was arrested underneath Gandhi, which was very ironic, underneath Gandhi on the 5th of July. She gave a speech that was encouraging people to interfere. And I like that word. It's a gentle word. But please interfere. Any way that you can. If you need to put your body on the line, put your body on the line. if all that you can do is have the strength to write emails, do petitions, work online, I'm not a computer person. I don't fight that fight. That's not my fight. I've always been a nurse, I've always been a net medic. My fight is a hands-on approach. So we're all equally valuable. We are all humanity. We are all Palestinians.